It was a Tuesday afternoon when I learned my mind was supposedly gone. The discovery did not happen in a doctor's office. There were no fluorescent lights, no sterile clipboards, no sympathetic neurologist offering me pamphlets on cognitive decline. It happened in the hallway of my son's home, standing just out of sight, holding a small pink cardigan my 4-year-old granddaughter had left in my car the previous weekend. I had let myself in with the spare brass key David had given me 5 years ago. I rarely used it without knocking, but it was raining, a heavy, relentless autumn downpour that soaked through my coat in the short walk from the driveway. I had intended to simply drape the cardigan over the banister, call out a quick hello, and leave. But as I slipped my wet shoes off on the mat, I heard Chloe's voice drifting from the kitchen. She was on the phone. Her tone was hushed. It was that specific, practiced register of performative tragedy that people use when they want to sound deeply concerned while secretly relishing the drama. "It's just getting so difficult," Chloe sighed. The clinking of a spoon stirring a ceramic mug punctuated her words. "David and I are sick with worry. We really are." A pause. She was listening to whoever was on the other end. Her mother, most likely. Or perhaps one of the women from her neighborhood association, the ones who traded family secrets like currency. "Well, that's the thing," Chloe continued, her voice lowering further. "We can't trust her with Leo and Mia anymore. Not after last week. I asked her to take them for the weekend, just so David and I could have 2 days to breathe, and she completely refused. But it wasn't just a refusal. She was erratic, confused. She said she was too tired to see her own grandchildren?" I stood frozen in the hallway, the damp wool of my coat clinging heavily to my shoulders. I remembered the conversation clearly. It had happened 3 days ago. For 46 consecutive weekends, I had been their unpaid, on-call childcare. I had canceled my own doctor's appointments, skipped my book club, and ignored the aching arthritis in my lower back to accommodate their last-minute dinner dates and sudden trips out of town. But last Friday, I had felt a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, a localized pain behind my ribs that made breathing difficult. I had simply told Chloe, quietly and politely, "I cannot take them this weekend, Chloe. I need a few days to rest." I had not shouted. I had not been erratic. I had just been tired. "I really think it's dementia," Chloe whispered into the phone, the word hanging in the quiet house like a drop of poison in a glass of water. "She's slipping, forgetting things. The other day I found her staring out the window for 20 minutes, completely blank. I told David we need to start looking at facilities, or at least take over her finances before she gives it all away to a scammer. She's just a liability now." My breathing slowed. The sound of the rain lashing against the hallway window seemed to amplify, drowning out the sudden, roaring silence in my own head. Dementia. She wasn't saying it out of concern. She was saying it out of vengeance. When a woman has served a family for 40 years, her first boundary is never seen as a request for rest. It is treated as a malfunction. I was a machine that had briefly stopped working, and instead of allowing me to pause, my daughter-in-law had decided to declare me obsolete. By framing me as senile, she accomplished 2 things instantly. First,
She made herself the victim of my refusal to babysit, a long-suffering mother burdened by an ailing mother-in-law. Second, she planted the seed to strip me of my autonomy. If I was crazy, my words no longer mattered. If I was crazy, my money was no longer mine.
If I was crazy, my house, the beautiful, sprawling mid-century home my late husband and I had paid off decades ago, could be liquidated to fund their lifestyle. I looked down at the pink cardigan in my hands. The soft cotton was slightly frayed at the cuff. I had mended it myself just 2 weeks ago while Mia slept on my chest, my breathing matching hers, my arms numb from holding her. I had given this family my youth, my patience, and my quiet, invisible labor. I had swallowed my pride when David married a woman who looked at me like an expired coupon. I had smiled through the condescending remarks at holiday dinners. I had kept the foundation of their lives intact while they played house. I thought of walking into the kitchen. I thought of slamming the pink cardigan onto the granite island, looking Chloe directly in the eyes and demanding she repeat her diagnosis to my face. But loud women are easily dismissed as hysterical. Angry older women are simply written off as bitter. If I raised my voice, I would only prove her right. I would give her the exact erratic behavior she was desperate to document. So I did nothing. I did not step into the light. I did not make a sound. Instead, I carefully folded the pink cardigan. I set it perfectly, squarely, in the dead center of the mahogany entryway table, a place where it was impossible to miss. A silent, pristine proof that someone entirely lucid had been there. Then I turned around. I stepped back out into the freezing rain, pulled the heavy oak door shut until the latch clicked softly, and walked to my car. The drive home was quiet. The rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers felt like a metronome, ticking down the final hours of the life I had known. I brewed a pot of black tea when I got home. I sat at my dining table, staring at the empty chairs, feeling a strange, hollow calmness settling over my chest. I wasn't just a grandmother anymore. I was a liability, a ghost they were preparing to evict. At 8:15 p.m., my phone buzzed against the dark wood of the table. It was David. I let it ring 3 times before sliding the answer button. "Mom?" His voice sounded strained, tighter than usual. "Hello, David," I said, my voice smooth, steady, and utterly calm. "Hey, listen," he cleared his throat. I could hear the faint sound of Chloe whispering something to him in the background. "Chloe and I were talking. We think it's time we come over tomorrow and have a serious discussion about your house. And, well, about your memory. We think you need some help managing things." I looked down at my tea. The dark liquid was perfectly still. "I see," I replied. "It's just for your own good, Mom. We're worried. You haven't been yourself." I closed my eyes. The trap had been set. The jaws were waiting to snap shut. But they had fundamentally misunderstood the prey they were hunting. "Tomorrow at noon," I said quietly. "Don't be late." I hung up the phone. I didn't cry. Instead, I stood up, walked to my study, and unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. If they wanted a helpless, confused old woman, they were going to get something else entirely. They were about to learn exactly who actually owned the life they were living. The heavy steel tracks of the bottom drawer groaned as I pulled it open. The air inside the filing cabinet smelled faintly of cedar and the sharp, clinical scent of aging paper. My late husband Arthur had been a meticulous man. When he passed away 8 years ago, he left behind a perfectly organized life. I had maintained that organization with the quiet devotion of a temple keeper. I bypassed the folders containing my own medical records and the deed to my home. My fingers walked past the life insurance policies and the tax returns until they found a thick navy blue folder near the very back. I carried it to my desk, turned on the small brass reading lamp, and opened it. There is a specific, foolish mistake that mothers make, born entirely out of love. We protect our grown sons from the humiliation of their own failures. We act as their safety nets, but we hide the ropes so they can stand tall and pretend they are flying. It teaches them that their mistakes have no gravity and that our sacrifices are simply their birthright. Inside the blue folder was the original deed to David and Chloe's home. 5 years ago, before Mia was born, David had come to this very house, sat in the chair opposite my desk, and wept. He had hidden a mountain of credit card debt from Chloe. His business venture had failed. They were weeks away from losing the townhouse they were renting, and Chloe was demanding they buy a home in a prestigious school district. David was terrified she would leave him if she knew the truth. So I did what mothers do. I saved him. I liquidated a portion of Arthur's life insurance. I purchased the 4-bedroom colonial they currently lived in, the one with the granite island where Chloe stood yesterday, diagnosing me with dementia. I bought it entirely in cash, under my name. To protect David's pride, we orchestrated a lie. I drafted a lease agreement masked as a loan. David transferred a monthly sum to me that he told Chloe was their mortgage payment. As far as my daughter-in-law knew, her husband was a brilliant provider, and they were building equity in a home they owned. She did not know that she was merely my tenant. I traced my finger over the raised seal of the deed. David had allowed his wife to believe I was a helpless, confused old woman whose assets were ripe for the taking, entirely forgetting who actually owned the roof over his head. Or perhaps he hadn't forgotten. Perhaps this sudden diagnosis of my mental decline was David's cowardly way of taking the title before I could ever hold the truth over his head. I closed the blue folder. I did not sleep that night. I simply sat by the window, watching the rain stop and the cold gray morning slowly bleed over the manicured lawns of my neighborhood. At 11:45 a.m., I put on a crisp, tailored ivory blouse. I brushed my hair, pinned it back carefully, and applied a single coat of pale lipstick. If you are going to attend your own execution, you should at least look the part of a queen rather than a peasant. I set 3 cups on the dining table. I did not use the fine china. I used the heavy, everyday ceramic mugs. Beside my cup, I placed the navy blue folder, resting my reading glasses neatly on top of it. At exactly noon, the crunch of tires sounded in the driveway. I remained seated at the head of the table. I heard the lock turn, David using his key. The front door opened, letting in a gust of crisp autumn wind. "Mom?" David's voice called out, carrying a forced, hearty brightness that he only used when he was about to ask for money. "I am in the dining room," I answered, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. They walked in. David looked exhausted. the dark circles under his eyes contrasting with the stiff posture of his shoulders. He refused to look directly at me, letting his gaze wander to the crown molding, the grandfather clock, anywhere but his mother's face. Chloe, however, stepped forward with the bright, terrifying energy of a hospice nurse who had already written off the patient. She was wearing a beige trench coat and holding a thick canvas tote bag tightly against her side. "Hi, Eleanor," she said, her voice dropping an octave into a slow, syrupy cadence. It was the voice one uses to speak to a toddler or a golden retriever. "How are we doing today? Did we sleep well?" The royal we, the ultimate linguistic weapon of the condescending. "I slept perfectly, Chloe," I said, gesturing to the chairs. "Please, sit." They pulled out their chairs. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked, a slow, heavy, rhythmic heartbeat that filled the silence. I poured the coffee from the French press into their mugs. Neither of them thanked me. "Mom," David started, clearing his throat. He laced his fingers together on the table. "We wanted to talk to you because we love you. And we've been noticing some things. You've been tired, you've been confused, refusing to see the kids last weekend. It just wasn't like you." "I told you I was unwell, David. I needed rest." I know, he said quickly, holding up a hand to pacify me. "But it's a pattern. Chloe has noticed it too. You're leaving things around. You're forgetting conversations. And we just want to make sure you're safe. We want to protect you." I took a slow sip of my black coffee. The heat burned the back of my throat, grounding me. "Protect me from what, precisely?" Chloe leaned forward, placing her elbows on the table. She gave me a deeply practiced, sympathetic smile. "From yourself, Eleanor. You have this big, beautiful house. You have accounts to manage. It's too much for someone in your condition. We don't want someone taking advantage of you." Before I could reply, she reached into her canvas tote bag. With the terrifying confidence of a woman who believes she has already won, Chloe pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers. She slid them smoothly across the polished oak table. They stopped exactly an inch from my coffee mug. The bold black letters at the top of the page read, "Durable power of attorney and transfer of deed." "It's just a formality," Chloe whispered gently, tilting her head. "We had a lawyer draw it up. It transfers management of your finances and this house to David, just until you're feeling more lucid. It means you won't have to worry about a thing anymore." I looked down at the documents. They wanted everything. They wanted the walls around me, the money in my bank, and the legal right to silence me forever. I did not scream. I did not cry. I slowly lifted my gaze from the papers, past Chloe's eager, expectant face, and looked at my son. David was staring at the table, his face pale, but he wasn't looking at the power of attorney documents. His eyes were locked on the navy blue folder resting silently beneath my hand. Silence in a family is never truly empty. It is heavy, dense, and suffocating, packed tight with everything people are too terrified to say out loud. Right now, the silence in my dining room belonged entirely to my son. David swallowed hard. I watched his Adam's apple bob. watched the blood drain rapidly from his cheeks until his skin took on the sallow, grayish tint of wet clay. His eyes remained anchored to the navy blue folder. He recognized the color. He recognized the embossed emblem of his father's old accounting firm pressed into the bottom right corner of the cardboard. He knew exactly what was inside it. "Well?" Chloe's voice sliced through the quiet, bright and completely oblivious to her husband's sudden paralysis. She tapped a French manicured fingernail against the legal documents she had slid across the table. "You don't have to read all the legal jargon, Eleanor. David can summarize it for you. Can't you, Dave?" David did not answer. He didn't blink. He just stared at my hands, which rested lightly, elegantly, on top of the blue folder. "Dave?" Chloe repeated, her syrupy tone cracking just a fraction, revealing the sharp impatience underneath. She looked at him, frowning. "Tell your mother what the lawyer said." I picked up my coffee mug, taking my time. The grandfather clock in the hallway swung its heavy brass pendulum. Tick-tock, tick-tock. "Yes, David," I said softly. My voice was calm, conversational, the tone of a mother asking about the weather. "Please, explain to me why I need you to manage my assets. Tell me how you plan to protect my financial stability." David's hands, still laced together on the table, began to tremble. It was a microscopic shake, a tiny vibration in his knuckles, but I saw it. I had spent 34 years studying this boy. I knew every tell, every flinch, every physical manifestation of his cowardice. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thin, suddenly stripped of all its forced authority. "Mom, please." "Please what?" Chloe snapped, her head whipping back and forth between us. She sensed the shift in the room's atmosphere, but couldn't identify the cause. "What is going on? Eleanor, just sign the paper. It's for your own good. We've already discussed this." "Who discussed this, Chloe?" I asked, not looking at her. I kept my eyes entirely fixed on my son. "David and I," she said defensively. "We talked about it all week. You're becoming a danger to yourself." "The way you acted last weekend." "Last weekend," I interrupted, my voice dropping lower, cutting off her practiced monologue instantly. "I told you I was tired and that I could not watch Mia and Leo." "You were erratic," Chloe protested, her volume rising. "You were confused." "I was resting, Chloe," I said smoothly, "because a woman of 68 who has provided free weekend childcare for 46 consecutive weeks is allowed to be tired. But you did not see a tired woman. You saw a disobedient servant. And when a servant disobeys, you attempt to take her house." Chloe's mouth dropped open. A flush of angry red crept up her neck. She was not used to me speaking this way. For 5 years, she had known only Grandma Eleanor, the soft, smiling woman who baked cookies, folded laundry, and absorbed passive-aggressive insults with a polite nod. She did not know the woman who sat across from her now. "How dare you?" Chloe hissed, abandoning the gentle hospice nurse routine entirely. Her eyes hardened into tiny, dark stones. "We are trying to help you. You're clearly slipping. You're paranoid. This right here, this reaction, proves exactly why David needs to take over." She slammed her hand flat on the table, pointing to the transfer deed. "Dave, tell her," she demanded. David looked like he was going to be sick. He slowly dragged his eyes up from the blue folder to look at me. The plea in his eyes was naked. It was the same look he had given me 5 years ago when he sat in my study, drowning in debt, begging me not to let his wife find out he was a failure. "Protect me," his eyes screamed. "Hide my shame." For my entire life, I had answered that look. I had covered for him. I had lied for him. I had absorbed his failures into my own body so he could walk cleanly through the world. I looked at my son, a man willing to declare his own mother mentally incompetent so he could steal her home, all to maintain the illusion of control in his marriage. I felt a cold, clean snap somewhere deep in my chest. The rope had finally broken. The safety net was gone. "David," I said, my voice completely stripped of maternal warmth. It was the voice of a landlord. "Are you going to explain the reality of your financial situation to your wife, or shall I?" Chloe froze. "What financial situation?" David squeezed his eyes shut. "Mom, don't. Please don't." "Don't what, David?" I asked. I slowly slid the power of attorney documents out of my way, pushing them toward the edge of the table like dirty napkins. "Don't tell her that you don't actually own a home to put up as collateral for my care." Chloe let out a short, incredulous laugh. "What are you talking about? Of course we own our home. We pay the mortgage every month." She looked at her husband. "Dave, what is she talking about?" I unclasped my hands. I picked up my reading glasses and rested them on the bridge of my nose. Then, very deliberately, I opened the navy blue folder. "You do not pay a mortgage, Chloe," I said calmly. "David transfers $3,200 into my checking account on the 1st of every month. It is not a mortgage payment to a bank. It is rent." Chloe stared at me. Her brain was furiously trying to process the words, but they were in a language she refused to understand. "Rent? To you? That's insane. We bought that house 5 years ago. David showed me the paperwork." I slid a single, crisp piece of heavy paper out of the blue folder. I rotated it 180 degrees and pushed it exactly into the center of the table, directly over the power of attorney document she had tried to make me sign. It was the property deed. "David showed you a lease agreement that he mocked up on his computer," I said quietly, watching the color drain from Chloe's face as she read the large, bold print at the top of the page. "You live at 421 Elmwood Drive. As you can see, the sole registered owner of that property is Eleanor Vance." Chloe's eyes darted across the page. She read the address. She read my name. She read the notary seal. Her breath hitched. She whipped her head toward her husband. "Dave?" she whispered, her voice trembling, stripped completely of its aggressive edge. "Dave, what is this? Tell me she faked this. Tell me she's crazy." David slowly lowered his face into his hands. His shoulders began to shake. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The silence did all the talking for him. I took another sip of my coffee. It was still warm. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound in the dining room was the heavy, ragged breathing of my son. Chloe remained perfectly still, her hands hovering above the table, as if she were afraid to touch the wood. Her eyes were locked onto the deed, tracing the letters of my name over and over again, searching for a typo, a loophole, a sign that the ground beneath her had not just given way. 5 years, Chloe finally whispered, the words scraping out of her throat like sandpaper. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at David. She just stared at the piece of paper. We've lived there for 5 years. We painted the nursery. We planted those hydrangeas by the porch. She finally looked up. When her eyes met David's, the betrayal in them was absolute. You told me we bought it, she said, her voice rising, shaking violently. You showed me an approval letter from the bank. You told me my parents could come over for Thanksgiving because it was our house. Dave, look at me. David dragged his hands down his face. He looked 10 years older than he had when he walked through my front door 20 minutes ago. Chloe, I had to, he mumbled, his voice thick and pathetic. He reached a hand out toward her arm, but she flinched away so violently her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. You had to? She shrieked. The performative hospice nurse was dead. The polished neighborhood association wife was gone. You had to lie to me about owning the home our children sleep in? Where did the down payment go, Dave? We saved $80,000. Where did it go? It was gone, I answered for him. My voice was calm, almost clinical. Chloe's head snapped toward me, her eyes wild, suddenly remembering I was in the room. $80,000 does not vanish, I continued smoothly, resting my hands on the table. It is spent on terrible investments, on undisclosed business debts, on credit cards used to maintain the illusion of a lifestyle you could not afford. 5 years ago, David came to this house in tears. He was bankrupt. He was terrified you would leave him if you knew. I looked directly at my son. He shrunk back into his chair, unable to meet my gaze. I bought the house, I said quietly, to save his marriage, to save your pride. I allowed you to play house in my property under my name while you paraded around town pretending to be a self-made family. Chloe looked like she had been physically struck. Her chest heaved. She turned her furious, tear-filled eyes back to the stack of papers she had brought, the power of attorney, the transfer of deed. The tragic irony of her plan was finally dawning on her. You tried to take my house today, I said, pointing a single finger at her fraudulent documents. You came here to declare me mentally incompetent so you could seize this property and sell it. But what you did not realize, Chloe, is that if you declare me incompetent, my estate falls under the control of a court-appointed executor. I watched the realization hit her. The blood rushed out of her face, leaving her completely pale. And if a court takes over my estate, I continued, my voice barely above a whisper, yet commanding the entire room, the first thing they will do is liquidate my secondary assets to pay for my care. I tapped my fingernail against the deed to her house. They would sell 421 Elmwood Drive. You would be evicted by the state within 30 days. By attempting to steal my home, you almost made yourself homeless. Chloe gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. She stared at the power of attorney papers as if they were venomous snakes. She had walked in here with a weapon, only to discover she had been holding it by the blade. You set us up, Chloe breathed, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and sudden irrational rage. You let me think. You let me act like... She couldn't even finish the sentence. The humiliation was choking her. I did nothing, Chloe, I said, my tone utterly flat. I remained perfectly silent. I allowed you to hang yourself with your own greed. David finally found his voice. It was desperate, pleading, the voice of the little boy who used to break lamps and beg me not to tell his father. "Mom, please," David begged, leaning over the table. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to bring those papers today. Chloe made me. She said you were slipping. She said we needed to protect the family." "Don't you dare put this on me," Chloe screamed, rounding on him. "You lied to me for 5 years. You made me look like an idiot in front of her, in front of my mother." "I was trying to protect you," David yelled back. "You were protecting yourself." I watched them. I did not intervene. I sat back in my chair, sipping my coffee, watching the foundation of their marriage crack and splinter right in front of me. This was the consequence of their own actions. I was merely the mirror reflecting it back to them. "Stop," I said quietly. They didn't hear me. Chloe was standing up now, pointing a shaking finger in David's face. "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through the room with a sharp, undeniable authority that echoed off the high ceilings. They both froze. They looked at me, breathing heavily, their faces flushed. "You are guests in my home," I said coldly. "You will not scream in my dining room." I reached across the table, picked up the deed to their house, and carefully placed it back into the navy blue folder. I closed the cover. The sound of the cardboard shutting felt like a judge's gavel. "Here is what is going to happen," I said. David swallowed hard. Chloe slowly lowered herself back into her chair, her eyes wide, realizing for the first time in 5 years exactly who held the leash. "You believed I was losing my mind. You told your friends I was a liability," I said, looking directly at Chloe. "You wanted to take over my finances to protect me." I think we can all agree that my mind is perfectly sound and my finances are meticulously managed. Neither of them spoke. They simply nodded, terrified of what I would say next. "However," I continued softly, "you have reminded me of my mortality. I am 68 years old. It is time I start simplifying my life. Managing rental properties is exhausting work for a woman my age." David's eyes widened. "Mom, what do you mean?" I folded my hands neatly on top of the blue folder. "I am selling 421 Elmwood Drive, David," I said. "I am putting it on the market next week." The silence that followed was not just heavy, it was violent. It was the specific kind of silence that happens exactly 1 second after a car crash, before the pain registers, before the screaming begins, when the brain is desperately trying to convince the body that the impact didn't actually happen. Chloe was the first to break. "You can't," she whispered. The words sounded hollow, stripped of all her previous arrogance. "Eleanor, you can't do that. That's our home. Where will we go?" "You are bright, capable adults," I replied smoothly, not breaking eye contact. "I am sure you will figure it out. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." "Mom!" David shouted, shooting up from his chair. His knees hit the underside of the heavy oak table, making the coffee mugs rattle. "Mom, you can't be serious. You can't just kick us out. We have kids. You're going to make your own grandchildren homeless? Ah, there it was, the ultimate weapon in the arsenal of a cornered adult child, the grandchildren. For 5 years, David and Chloe had used Mia and Leo as currency. If I displeased them, access was restricted. If I complied, I was rewarded with a weekend of exhausting labor masquerading as quality bonding time. They believed my love for those children was a chain they could pull whenever they needed me to submit. They did not understand that I was tired of wearing the collar. "I am not making my grandchildren homeless, David," I said softly, my voice completely devoid of the panic he was hoping to incite. "You are. I provided a free house for 5 years. I gave you half a decade to save your money, to rebuild your credit, to secure a future for your family. What did you do with that time?" David opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "You leased 2 luxury SUVs, I answered for him, listing the facts with clinical precision. "Chloe remodeled a kitchen that was already brand new. You took 3 vacations to resorts in Mexico. You spent the money you should have been saving for a house on an illusion of wealth." I looked at Chloe. She was staring at her hands, tears silently tracking through her perfect foundation. "And yesterday," I continued, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, "while standing in the kitchen I purchased for you, you told your friends I was a senile, erratic liability who needed to be locked in a facility." Chloe flinched violently, as if I had struck her. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with pure terror. You heard that?" she stammered, the remaining color draining from her face. "The tea was still warm, Chloe," I said quietly. "I left Mia's pink cardigan on the entryway table. Did you really think I had forgotten it?" Chloe let out a choked sob, pressing the heels of her hands against her eyes. The realization of her own catastrophic arrogance had finally crushed her. She had mistaken my silence for absence. She had thought she was safe in her own home, completely forgetting that it was mine. I didn't mean it," Chloe sobbed, her voice a desperate, high-pitched whine. "I was just stressed, Eleanor. The kids were acting up, and I was just venting. I didn't mean any of it." "It does not matter if you meant it," I said, entirely unmoved by her tears. I had dried too many fake tears in my lifetime to be swayed by these. What matters is what you intended to do. I pointed to the power of attorney documents still sitting on the table. You intended to steal my autonomy. You intended to strip me of my home, my money, and my dignity, simply because I refused to be your unpaid servant for 1 weekend. You wanted to discard me. I picked up the blue folder and slowly stood up from the head of the table. David looked at me, his face twisted in genuine anguish. For a brief second, I saw the little boy who used to hide behind my legs when it thundered. The urge to comfort him, to protect him, flared up in my chest, an ancient biological reflex built into the marrow of motherhood. But I forced it down. To protect him now would be to destroy myself. "Mom, please," David begged, his voice cracking. He reached out, grabbing the edge of the table as if it could keep him grounded. "I'll do anything. I'll pay you more rent. I'll get a second job. Just please don't sell the house. Don't do this to us. to the kids. I am not doing anything to you, David, I said, looking down at him. I am simply stopping what I have been doing for you. There is a profound difference. I walked over to the mahogany sideboard and opened the top drawer. I placed the blue folder inside and locked it with a small brass key. I slipped the key into the pocket of my slacks. You have 30 days, I repeated, my back still turned to them. The real estate agent will contact you on Monday to arrange times for photography. I suggest you begin packing. You're a monster, Chloe whispered. I turned around. She was standing now, clutching her canvas tote bag to her chest like a shield. Her tears had stopped, replaced by a cold, bitter fury. She couldn't handle the shame of her failure, so she needed a villain. I was more than happy to play the part. You're a cold, selfish old woman, Chloe spat, her voice shaking with venom. You're doing this just to punish us, to prove a point. You don't even need the money. No, I don't, I agreed calmly, but I need my peace. And I cannot find peace while funding the lives of people who actively plot my demise. I walked toward the hallway, gesturing to the front door. Take your documents, Chloe. They are useless here. And leave my house. David stood up slowly, looking completely broken. He didn't look at his wife. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the floor as he shuffled toward the door, moving like a man walking to the gallows. Chloe grabbed the power of attorney papers, stuffing them violently into her bag. She marched past me, her shoulder intentionally brushing aggressively against mine. You won't see the kids, she hissed in my ear as she passed. You're dead to us. You hear me? You will never see Mia or Leo again. It was the final threat, the nuclear option. I looked her dead in the eye. I did not flinch. If you attempt to withhold my grandchildren from me out of spite, Chloe, I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet sharp as a scalpel, I will not give you 30 days. I will file an emergency eviction on Monday morning. You will have your belongings on the curb by Wednesday. Do not test me. Chloe's mouth snapped shut. The venom in her eyes flickered, replaced instantly by the cold, hard reality of survival. She knew I wasn't bluffing. She turned and walked out the door into the crisp afternoon air. David lingered in the doorway for a moment. He looked back at me, his eyes wide and hollow. You're really doing this, Mom? He asked softly. I have already done it, David, I replied. Close the door behind you. He stepped outside. The heavy oak door swung shut, the latch clicking with a solid, satisfying finality. I stood in the silent hallway. The grandfather clock ticked. The house was empty, quiet, and completely mine. I walked back into the dining room, picked up their half-full coffee mugs, and poured the cold, bitter liquid down the sink. The eviction was only the beginning. They thought the house was the only foundation I had built for them. They had no idea how many invisible strings I was holding, and I was about to cut every single one. The following Monday morning, the true weight of consequence began to manifest, not with a dramatic explosion, but with a series of quiet, bureaucratic clicks. I sat at my desk, my laptop open, a fresh pot of Earl Grey tea steaming beside me. The autumn sun poured through the study window, illuminating the dust motes dancing over the mahogany surface. There is a myth in families like mine that the matriarch simply helps out, that she offers a few dollars here, a favor there, smoothing over the rough edges of daily life. But it is never just helping out. It is an entire hidden infrastructure. For 5 years, I had been the silent scaffolding holding up the structural integrity of David and Chloe's life. I didn't just pay for the house, I insured it. I didn't just babysit, I funded the very mechanisms that allowed them to function. It was time to dismantle the scaffolding. I opened my web browser and logged into my primary checking account. I navigated to the Recurring Payments tab. There it was. Autopay, State Farm Insurance, $240. This was the comprehensive auto insurance policy covering both of David and Chloe's leased luxury SUVs. 2 years ago, David had rear-ended a delivery truck. His premium had skyrocketed to a number he could not afford without sacrificing Chloe's weekly Pilates membership or their expensive meal delivery service. He had panicked, called me in tears, and I, like a fool, had quietly assumed the monthly payments, transferring the policy to my account to give them a few months to catch up. A few months had turned into 24. I clicked Cancel Recurring Payment. A small confirmation box popped up on the screen. Are you sure you want to cancel this automatic transfer? I clicked yes. I moved down the list. Autopay, Verizon Wireless Family Plan, $185. This one had started when Mia was born. David had convinced me that since we called each other so often to coordinate childcare, it would simply be easier and more cost-effective to merge our cellular plans. Somehow, I had become the account holder, quietly absorbing the cost of their unlimited data and yearly phone upgrades. I didn't cancel the account entirely. That would cut off my own phone. But I navigated to the line management page. I selected David's number. I selected Chloe's number. Suspend service. The screen refreshed. A small green check mark appeared. I took a slow sip of my tea. The bergamot was sharp and comforting. Next was the country club. Chloe's absolute pride and joy was her junior membership at the Oak Ridge Country Club. It was where she networked with the other neighborhood wives, drank overpriced Chardonnay by the pool, and maintained her illusion of upper-middle-class supremacy. David had sworn to me that the membership was purely for business networking, vital for his struggling career. In reality, it was a social vanity project. They couldn't afford the $4,000 annual dues. 3 years ago, I had written the check to cover the initiation fee. For the past 2 years, I had quietly paid the annual renewal directly to the club's billing department. Chloe believed David's bonuses covered it. David knew exactly where the money came from, but had simply stopped thanking me for it, treating my annual check as an expected subsidy. I opened my email and drafted a message to the Oak Ridge billing manager. Dear Thomas, please be advised that I will not be renewing the junior membership for David and Chloe Vance for the upcoming calendar year. Do not bill my card on file for any future dues or incidental charges incurred by them. Any outstanding balances from this date forward are their sole responsibility. Warm regards, Eleanor Vance. I clicked send. I sat back in my chair looking at the screen. In less than 15 minutes, with a few clicks of a mouse and a polite email, I had removed nearly $600 of monthly invisible support from their budget and stripped them of their social sanctuary. And they had no idea it was coming. They wouldn't notice immediately. That was the beauty of the trap they had built for themselves. They were so accustomed to the frictionless existence I provided that they never bothered to check the mechanics of their own lives. The first impact would likely be the phones. I looked at the clock. It was 9:45 a.m. At 10:12 a.m., my house phone, the heavy landline sitting on the edge of my desk, completely separate from my cellular plan, began to ring. I let it ring 4 times. I picked up the receiver. "Hello," I said calmly. "Mom, thank God!" David's voice crackled through the receiver. He sounded breathless, panicked. "Mom, are you near your computer? Something is wrong with the Verizon account." "Is there?" I asked mildly, turning my gaze to look out the window. A pair of blue jays were bickering over the bird feeder in the oak tree. "Yes, I'm at the office, and I was trying to call a client, and my cell just says no service. I asked Chloe to check hers from home, and she used the landline to call me. Hers is dead too. Did you forget to pay the bill?" There it was. Did you forget to pay the bill? Not, is there a glitch? Not, did something happen? He immediately assumed the failure was my fault, a symptom of the very cognitive decline they had tried to weaponize against me. I was the machine, and I had forgotten to run my program. "I did not forget to pay the bill, David," I said, my voice smooth and deliberate. "I paid my portion. I suspended your lines." A heavy, static-filled silence echoed over the receiver. "You what?" David asked, his voice dropping into a confused whisper. "I suspended your lines," I repeated clearly. "As you so astutely pointed out on Saturday, I am 68 years old. I need to simplify my responsibilities. Managing a family data plan is simply too much for my fragile mental state. I am sure you understand." "Mom, you can't be serious," David hissed. The panic in his voice was rapidly morphing into anger. "I need my phone for work. Chloe needs her phone for emergencies with the kids. You can't just cut us off without warning." "I am giving you warning now," I replied. "You are 32 years old, David. Walk into a Verizon store on your lunch break. Open an account in your own name and pay your own bills. It is a fundamental requirement of adulthood." "I don't have time for this today," he shouted, the facade of the successful businessman completely shattering. "Mom, turn the lines back on, please. I have 3 conference calls this afternoon." "Then I suggest you use your office phone," I said. "Mom!" "Goodbye, David," I said softly, and placed the receiver gently back onto the cradle. It clicked, severing the connection. I stared at the phone for a long moment. My chest felt tight, a strange mixture of grief and adrenaline flooding my veins. It is a terrifying thing to stop catching your child when they fall. It feels entirely unnatural, a violation of the most primal maternal instinct. But David was not falling. He had been comfortably lying on the ground for 5 years, demanding I carry him. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and began to prepare lunch. The phones were just the beginning. The auto insurance would lapse in 3 days, and on Friday afternoon, Chloe was scheduled to host her monthly neighborhood association luncheon at the Oak Ridge Country Club. She was going to walk up to the mahogany host stand, order 4 bottles of expensive Chardonnay on her tab, and discover exactly how much her arrogance had cost her. Friday arrived with a brittle, cloudless sky, the kind of autumn day that looks warm through the window but bites the skin the moment you step outside. I spent the morning in my garden, pruning the rose bushes with thick leather gloves and a pair of sharp, rusted shears. The repetitive physical labor was grounding. With every satisfying snip of the heavy stems, I felt a fraction of the lingering anxiety drain from my shoulders. I knew exactly what was happening across town. Chloe's monthly luncheons at the Oak Ridge Country Club were a meticulously choreographed performance. She had explained the mechanics of it to me once, years ago, when she was still trying to impress me. She would arrive at noon, securing the best table by the window overlooking the 18th hole. By 12:15, her friends, a coven of women united only by their shared fear of aging and downward social mobility, would arrive. Chloe always ordered the wine. She always charged it to her account. It was her way of asserting dominance, a silent declaration that her husband was successful, her life was stable, and she was the undisputed alpha of their little group. At 1:30 p.m., my cell phone vibrated in the pocket of my gardening apron. I set down the shears, pulled off my right glove, and checked the screen. Incoming call, Chloe Vance. I did not answer. I slid the phone back into my pocket, picked up my shears, and moved to the next rose bush. It rang again at 1:32 p.m., and again at 1:35 p.m., and again at 1:37 p.m. By the fifth call, I could almost picture the scene. The polite, strained smile on the face of the country club manager, the sudden, agonizing silence of Chloe's friends as they watched her frantically tap at her phone screen, her cheeks burning with the unique, suffocating humiliation of a declined card at a public venue. At 1:45 p.m., a text message came through. Chloe, answer the phone, Eleanor. This isn't funny. They are telling me my membership is suspended. I have 4 people sitting at my table. I read the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. For a brief, fleeting second, the old Eleanor, the peacemaker, the shock absorber, wanted to reply. I wanted to tell her to pass the phone to the manager so I could authorize a one-time charge, saving her from the absolute mortification she was currently enduring. But then I remembered the heavy oak table in my dining room. I remembered the power of attorney documents sliding across the wood. I remembered her voice, syrupy and condescending, telling me I was a danger to myself. I locked the phone screen and dropped it back into my pocket. 10 minutes later, the landline inside the house began to ring. It was a loud, demanding sound that carried through the open kitchen window. I finished pruning the final rose bush, gathered my clippings into the yard waste bag, and walked slowly back inside. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, dried them on a linen towel, and picked up the phone. Hello? Are you insane? Chloe screamed. She wasn't at the country club anymore. The sound of a car engine idling in the background and the sharp slamming of a heavy car door told me she was in the parking lot. She was hyperventilating, her voice breaking into frantic, jagged pieces. Are you out of your goddamn mind, Eleanor? She shrieked. I just had to ask Sarah to pay for a $200 lunch. The manager came over to the table in front of everyone and said my account was flagged for non-renewal. He said the primary account holder canceled the billing. That is correct, I said calmly, leaning against the kitchen counter. Why? Chloe demanded, her voice entirely stripped of its usual haughty control. She sounded like a panicked teenager. "Why would you do that? You pay that every year." "I paid the initiation fee, Chloe. I paid the renewals out of courtesy," I corrected her gently. "But as I explained on Saturday, I am liquidating my extraneous expenses. Funding a social club for a woman who attempted to legally steal my home is no longer in my budget." "You did this to humiliate me," she sobbed, the sound raw and genuinely devastated. For someone like Chloe, public embarrassment was a fate worse than physical injury. "You waited until I was sitting there with my friends and you pulled the rug out. You're a vindictive, evil old woman."
"I sent the cancellation email on Monday," I replied smoothly. "If David had been honest with you about your finances, he would have warned you. But David does not tell you the truth, does he, Chloe?" The line went dead quiet. All I could hear was her rapid, shaky breathing. "David did not tell you the phones were shut off on Monday, did he?" I asked softly, already knowing the answer. The phones?" Chloe stammered, the anger suddenly deflating, replaced by profound confusion. "My phone has been working fine." "Because you are likely connected to the Wi-Fi in your home, or the Wi-Fi at the country club," I explained. "Turn your Wi-Fi off, Chloe. Try to make a call." I waited. I heard the rustle of clothing, the faint tapping of a screen against her ear. She was using the Bluetooth system in her luxury SUV to talk to me, checking her physical phone screen while she did. A sharp intake of breath hissed through the speaker. "It says SOS only," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "Eleanor, what did you do?" "I suspended the lines. I am no longer paying for your cellular service, just as I am no longer paying your auto insurance, which, if David hasn't told you, will cancel at midnight tonight." "Auto insurance?" Chloe's voice cracked. She sounded dizzy, unable to process the rapid, consecutive collapse of the invisible pillars holding up her life. "Eleanor, stop. Please, stop doing this. We don't have the money for this right now. David's commission check doesn't come for another 2 weeks." "Then you will have to budget carefully," I said. "You can't do this," she screamed again, the panic flooding back in, rising into genuine hysteria. "You are literally destroying our lives." "I am doing nothing of the sort," I said, my voice hardening. The polite conversational tone vanished. "I am simply walking away. The fact that my absence looks exactly like destruction should terrify you, Chloe. It means you built your entire life on my back." "I have kids," she sobbed, playing her final desperate card. "Mia is 4. What if there's an emergency? What if I need to call an ambulance and my phone doesn't work?" "Then David should prioritize paying his Verizon bill over leasing the $80,000 car you are currently sitting in," I said coldly. "I'm going to tell everyone," Chloe threatened, her voice turning ugly, cornered, and vicious. "I'm going to tell the whole family what you're doing to us. I'm going to tell them you're abusive." I smiled. It was a small, sad, and completely humorless smile, but I felt it pull at the corners of my mouth. "Do it," I said softly. "What?" Chloe choked, clearly thrown by my response. "Tell them, Chloe. Call my sister. Call David's cousins. Call the aunts and uncles. Tell them exactly what I am doing." I paused, letting the silence stretch out, heavy and suffocating. "But if you tell them I cut you off, you will have to explain why."
You will have to tell them you lived in my house for 5 years, pretending you owned it. You will have to tell them David is broke. You will have to tell them you tried to declare me mentally incompetent to steal my assets. I heard a sharp, stifled sob on the other end of the line. You love your image more than you love your husband, Chloe, I stated quietly, driving the final nail into the coffin. You will not tell anyone, because the truth makes you look like a parasite. She didn't answer. Drive home carefully, Chloe, I said. Your insurance expires in 10 hours. I hung up the phone. I did not go back out to the garden. I sat at the kitchen island, looking at the empty driveway. The house was quiet. My chest felt hollow, entirely emptied out. I had won the battle. I had proven my point. I had dismantled their arrogance with terrifying precision. So why did it feel like I was the one bleeding? Over the next 2 weeks, a strange, suffocating silence descended upon my life. It was not the peaceful silence of a quiet afternoon, nor the restful silence of a house after guests have gone home. It was the tense, vibrating silence of a battlefield after the artillery has stopped firing, when you are simply waiting for the smoke to clear to see what is still standing. There were no more frantic phone calls from David begging me to fix a crisis. There were no more condescending texts from Chloe reminding me of my babysitting duties. In fact, there was nothing at all. I had expected rage. I had prepared myself for David to arrive on my doorstep, pounding on the heavy oak wood, demanding I reverse the evaporation of his lifestyle. I had mentally rehearsed the arguments, standing firm in my resolve. But David did not come. Instead, the only communication I received was bureaucratic. On a Tuesday afternoon, my real estate agent, a sharp, fiercely competent woman named Helen, whom I had known for 20 years, called me from her office. "Eleanor," Helen said, her voice carrying a distinct tone of professional confusion, "I just received an email from your son. I'm a bit perplexed." "What did the email say, Helen?" I asked, setting down the book I had been reading. "Well, he's asked me to delay the staging and photography for the Elmwood property," she explained, the rustle of papers audible through the receiver. "He states that there is a misunderstanding regarding the title, and that the family is currently exploring legal avenues to halt the sale. Eleanor, is there an encumbrance on the deed I should be aware of?" I closed my eyes. The sheer audacity of his cowardice was breathtaking. He didn't have the courage to face me. He didn't have the money to buy the house. He didn't have the resources to move his family. So, instead of acting like a man, he had reverted to the tactics of a frightened child. He was trying to build a wall out of lies to hide behind. He was hoping that if he threw enough confusing legal jargon at my agent, I would simply get tired, give up, and let them stay. He was banking on my exhaustion. He was relying on the decades of conditioning that told him I would eventually fold if the resistance became too complicated. "There is no encumbrance, Helen," I said smoothly, opening my eyes. "I own the property free and clear. There is no mortgage, no lien, and certainly no legal avenue for my tenants to halt the sale." "Tenants?" Helen asked, pausing. "I thought David and Chloe lived there." "They do," I said, "and they are my tenants. Their 30-day notice was delivered legally over a week ago." There was a long, heavy silence on Helen's end of the line. In the affluent circles of our town, family disputes were common, but they were usually handled behind closed doors, with hushed settlements, never pushed to the point of a public eviction. Helen was a professional, but she was also a mother. I could hear the gears turning in her head, trying to process the magnitude of what I was doing. "Eleanor," she started gently, "are you absolutely certain you want to proceed? Once we list it, it becomes public record. The entire neighborhood will know." "I am aware," I said. "Please inform David that if he interferes with your photographers again, I will have him removed from the property by law enforcement. The listing goes live on the 1st of the month." "Understood," Helen said softly. "I'll handle it." I hung up the phone and walked to the kitchen to boil water. The silence in the house felt heavier now. The adrenaline of the initial confrontation had burned off, leaving behind a cold, clinical reality. I was dismantling my own family. I was systematically destroying the life of my only child. I stared out the window at the dying autumn leaves, watching the wind strip the branches bare. Was I wrong? The thought crept into my mind, a dark, insidious whisper. Was Chloe right? Am I a monster? Am I a vindictive, evil old woman, punishing them just to prove I can? I thought of Mia's little hands, sticky with strawberry jam, reaching for me. I thought of Leo's chaotic, joyful laugh echoing down my hallway. If I sold the house, I would likely never see them again. Chloe would make certain of it. She would weaponize the children entirely, using their absence to break me. I would become the villain in their bedtime stories, the wicked grandmother who kicked them out into the cold. My hand trembled as I poured the boiling water into my teacup. I picked up my cell phone. I unlocked the screen. I pulled up David's contact. All I had to do was press call. All I had to do was tell him I had changed my mind. I could keep the house. I could reinstate the insurance. I could go back to being the quiet, invisible foundation. I could have my grandchildren back. My thumb hovered over the green button. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Then my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text message, not from David, not from Chloe. It was from my sister Margaret. Margaret lived 3 states away. We spoke on the phone perhaps once a month, usually trading pleasantries and recipes. She was a woman who thrived on gossip, the kind of person who collected family tragedies like rare coins, eager to spend them at the next social gathering. The message read, "Eleanor, please call me. I just got off the phone with David. I am so terribly worried about you." My thumb froze over the screen. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I hit the call button on Margaret's contact instead. She answered on the first ring. "Eleanor, oh, thank goodness," Margaret breathed, her voice dripping with that specific theatrical pity I despised. "I am so glad you called. Are you all right? Are you safe?" "I am perfectly safe, Margaret," I said, my voice hardening instantly. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Well, David called me an hour ago," she said, lowering her voice as if someone were listening at her door. "He was in tears, Eleanor, absolute tears. He said things have gotten so bad at the house." "What did he say, Margaret?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "He said you're having some sort of paranoid break," she whispered, clearly relishing the drama. "He said you've stopped paying your bills, that you cut off your own phone line, and that you're threatening to sell the house because you think he and Chloe are trying to steal from you." The cold knot in my stomach turned to stone. He said he's terrified for you, Margaret continued, entirely oblivious to the silence radiating from my end of the line. He said you're refusing to see a doctor, and he's afraid he might have to petition the state for guardianship just to keep you from destroying your own life. Eleanor, please tell me this isn't true. Are you confused? Have you seen a neurologist? I closed my eyes. The teacup on the counter stopped steaming. David hadn't retreated. He hadn't surrendered. He had simply changed tactics. He couldn't bully me into submission, so he was building a narrative. He was planting the seeds of my insanity among the extended family, creating a paper trail of concern. He was manipulating my own sister into becoming a witness to my decline. If he could convince the family I was senile, he wouldn't need me to sign the power of attorney. He could simply take it to a judge, cite my erratic behavior, canceling insurances, shutting off phones, trying to evict my own son, as proof of my incompetence, and seize control of my estate by force. He was actually trying to destroy me. Eleanor, Margaret asked, her voice faltering slightly, are you still there? I am here, Margaret, I said softly. All the guilt, all the maternal doubt, all the hesitation evaporated, replaced by a terrifying, absolute clarity. Are you feeling okay? She pressed. I have never felt better, I said smoothly. Tell David I appreciate his concern, and tell him I will see him in court. I hung up the phone. I did not cry. I did not shake. I picked up my tea, walked to my study, and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I pulled out a thick manila envelope labeled Legal and Estate. If my son wanted a war over my sanity, I was going to give him a massacre. The law firm of Benson, Hayes & Sterling occupied the top floor of a glass-fronted building downtown, entirely detached from the suburban gossip circles Chloe frequented. I arrived at precisely 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning, dressed in a charcoal gray wool suit and carrying the manila envelope. I did not look like a woman losing her mind. I looked like a woman preparing an autopsy. My attorney, Richard Sterling, had handled my late husband's estate. He was a man in his early 60s with sharp eyes and a demeanor that suggested he had seen every possible iteration of human greed. He poured me a cup of black coffee from a silver carafe on his desk. Eleanor, he said, taking his seat across from me, it has been a few years. You mentioned on the phone that this was a matter of urgent estate restructuring? Yes, Richard, I replied, placing the manila envelope on his pristine glass desk. It is. I did not start with the eviction. I did not start with a country club or the canceled insurance. I started precisely where a lawyer needs you to start, with the threat to the assets. My son David is currently laying the groundwork to petition the state for forced guardianship over me, I stated calmly, folding my hands in my lap. He is actively telling extended family members that I am suffering from dementia, that I am financially erratic, and that I am a danger to myself. Richard's expression did not change, but his eyes hardened instantly. He set his pen down. Has he filed any formal paperwork with the court? Not yet, I replied. He is building a narrative first. He is gathering witnesses. He wants to present a case that I have suddenly and erratically begun destroying my own life. I opened the envelope. I slid a neatly organized stack of papers across his desk. "Here is the reality, Richard," I said, my voice clinical and precise. 5 years ago, I purchased a home entirely in cash, under my name. I allowed David and his wife Chloe to live there, rent-free, under the guise of a false lease agreement to protect his ego after a massive financial failure. Richard picked up the deed to 421 Elmwood Drive, his eyes scanning the document rapidly. I also quietly absorbed the cost of their cellular plans, their auto insurance, and various social club dues. I did this to maintain their illusion of stability. I slid the next stack of papers across the desk. It was a complete itemized spreadsheet I had built the night before. Here is a ledger detailing exactly how much invisible financial support I have provided them over the last 60 months. It totals over $140,000. Richard let out a low, slow whistle, tapping his pen against the edge of the glass desk. "Last weekend," I continued, "I refused to provide free childcare. My daughter-in-law retaliated by attempting to force me to sign a durable power of attorney under the claim that my refusal to babysit was a symptom of cognitive decline." I slid the final document across the desk. It was a photocopy of the fraudulent power of attorney Chloe had slammed onto my dining room table. I had quietly snapped a photo of it with my phone before she stuffed it back into her bag. Richard stared at the photocopy. He looked at the heavy black letters at the top of the page. He looked at the signature line. "So," Richard said, leaning back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers together. "You cut them off." "I cut them off," I confirmed. "I canceled the insurance. I suspended the phones, and I served them with a 30-day notice of eviction. They will claim this sudden withdrawal of support is proof of my insanity. I need you to prove it is an act of extreme, calculated lucidity." Richard looked at me for a long time. There was no pity in his eyes, only a deep professional respect. "Eleanor," he said softly, "if David actually files for guardianship, it will be incredibly ugly. He will drag your entire life into a courtroom. He will have his wife testify. They will attempt to use your love for your grandchildren as leverage to break you. I am aware. Are you prepared for that level of hostility from your own child?" I looked out the window of his office. The city stretched out below us, busy, ignorant, and entirely unconcerned with the silent wars fought inside families. "Richard," I said softly, "my son died 5 years ago when he decided to lie to his wife to save his pride. The man wearing his face right now is simply a tenant who has overstayed his welcome." Richard did not blink. He nodded slowly, picking up his pen. "All right," he said, his voice shifting into the crisp, rapid cadence of a man preparing for battle. "First, we bulletproof you. I am scheduling you an appointment with a board-certified neurologist tomorrow morning. I want a comprehensive cognitive assessment. I want it on paper, signed by a specialist, stating that your mind is perfectly sharp." "Done." "Second," he continued, pulling a fresh legal pad toward him, "we are drafting an immediate, irrevocable trust. We are placing the Elmwood property, your primary residence, and all of your liquid assets inside it. We will name a corporate trustee, a bank, to manage it in the event of your actual incapacitation. We are removing David entirely from your estate. Even if he somehow convinces the judge you are senile, he will not get a single dime. The bank will hold the keys. I felt a profound, chilling sense of peace wash over me. I was locking the doors from the inside. Third, Richard said, his eyes locking onto mine, we go on the offensive. If David files a petition for guardianship, he must do so under penalty of perjury. He must claim you are mentally unfit to manage your affairs. The moment he files that document, I will counterfile with this spreadsheet. He tapped the itemized ledger of my financial support. I will demonstrate to the court that David is completely financially dependent on you. I will show the judge that his petition is not an act of concern, but an act of financial desperation by a bankrupt child attempting to exploit his mother. The judge will throw the case out, and David will be publicly humiliated on public record. Do it, I said, without a moment of hesitation. And the eviction? Richard asked.
Proceeds as planned. They have 21 days left. Excellent, Richard said, standing up from his desk. He extended his hand. Eleanor, I am deeply sorry it has come to this, but rest assured, by the time we are finished, your son will realize he brought a knife to a gunfight. I shook his hand. It was a firm, dry grip. I left the law office at 10:30 a.m. As I walked out of the glass building and into the crisp autumn air, my cell phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out. Incoming call, Chloe Vance. She hadn't called me since the meltdown in the country club parking lot. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. Hello, Chloe, I said smoothly. Eleanor, she said. Her voice was not frantic. It was not screaming. It was eerily calm, tightly controlled. The voice of a woman who had finally realized she was cornered and was preparing to strike. We need to talk. I am currently busy, Chloe. What is it? David told me what you did, she said, her voice dropping lower. He told me you called the real estate agent. He told me you're actually going to list the house. That is correct. You won't get away with it, she hissed, the mask slipping just a fraction. You think you're so smart. You think you can just snap your fingers and ruin our lives. But David is filing the papers tomorrow. My steps slowed. What papers, Chloe? Guardianship, she spat, the word dripping with venomous triumph. He's doing it, Eleanor. He talked to a lawyer yesterday. He's taking control of the estate. The lawyer said that once the petition is filed, all sales of your assets are frozen by the court. You won't be able to sell the house. She paused, waiting for my panic, waiting for me to beg. I stood on the bustling sidewalk, watching the traffic rush past. I did not panic. I felt only a cold, clinical disappointment. I see, I said softly. You did this to yourself, Chloe sneered. You pushed us too far. Now you're going to lose everything. Chloe, I said, my voice completely dead of emotion. Tell David to make absolutely sure he spells my name correctly on the petition. I hung up the phone. The trap was fully set. Now I just had to wait for them to step inside it. The following morning, I sat in the sterile, brightly lit office of Dr. Eris Thorne, a leading neurologist at the city's premier private clinic. Richard Sterling was a man who moved with terrifying efficiency.
He hadn't just scheduled an appointment. He had called in a favor to ensure I was seen by the director of the department himself. Dr. Thorne was a kind man with silver hair and gentle eyes, accustomed to delivering devastating news to terrified families. He guided me through a series of exhaustive cognitive tests. I drew clock faces. I repeated sequences of numbers backward. I identified objects. We called lists of obscure words and navigated complex spatial reasoning puzzles. Throughout the 2-hour evaluation, I remained perfectly calm, answering his questions with crisp, deliberate accuracy. Finally, he set his clipboard down on his desk, removed his reading glasses, and looked at me with a mild, puzzled expression. "Mrs. Vance," he began, folding his hands over the desk, "I must admit I am slightly confused as to why you are here. Your cognitive function is not merely normal for a woman of 68, it is exceptional. You score in the upper 99th percentile for memory retention and executive function. There is absolutely zero clinical evidence of dementia, mild cognitive impairment, or any neurological degradation whatsoever." "Thank you, doctor," I said smoothly. "May I ask," he tilted his head, "who suggested you required this evaluation?" "My son," I replied, keeping my gaze level. "He is currently attempting to petition the state for guardianship over me, claiming I am mentally unfit to manage my estate." "Doctor." Thorne's gentle demeanor evaporated instantly. He sat back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as the clinical reality of my situation clicked into place. He looked at the perfect clock face I had drawn. He looked at the flawless sequence of recalled words. "I see," Dr. Thorne said quietly, his voice dropping into a solemn, professional register. "This is not a medical appointment, Mrs. Vance. This is a legal defense." "It is," I confirmed. "I need a comprehensive, notarized affidavit detailing the exact results of this exam, explicitly stating that I possess full, unimpaired mental capacity to manage my own financial and legal affairs." "You will have it by 3 o'clock this afternoon," Dr. Thorne said, reaching for his pen. "I will courier a certified copy directly to Mr. Sterling's office." "Thank you, doctor." I left the clinic and drove home. The house was silent, as it had been for nearly 3 weeks. The grandfather clock ticked. The air felt still, holding its breath. At 4:15 p.m., the heavy brass knocker on my front door sounded. It was not a frantic knock. It was a firm, authoritative, heavy strike against the wood. I set down my book, smoothed the wrinkles from my skirt, and walked to the entryway. I opened the door. Standing on my porch was a man I did not recognize. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit and holding a thick manila envelope. He looked bored, the expression of a man who spent his life delivering bad news to strangers. "Eleanor Vance?" he asked, checking a clipboard in his left hand. "Yes." "You've been served," he said flatly, extending the manila envelope toward me. I took it. He turned around, walked down the steps, climbed into a dented sedan parked at the curb, and drove away without looking back. I stood on the porch for a long moment, the cool autumn wind tugging at the edges of my cardigan. I looked down at the envelope. It was heavy. I closed the front door, walked to the dining room table, and opened it. I slid the stack of legal documents out. The stark, bold print at the top of the first page read, "In the probate court of the county, petition for appointment of guardian and conservator of an incapacitated adult." Petitioner, David Arthur Vance. Respondent, Eleanor Margaret Vance. I read through the documents slowly, carefully, tracing the lines of text with my index finger. The sheer volume of lies was staggering. Under the section detailing the nature of incapacity, David had signed his name to a sworn statement claiming that I was exhibiting severe paranoia, financial erraticism, and an inability to recognize family members. He claimed that my decision to cancel his auto insurance and suspend his cell phone lines was evidence of severe cognitive decline and a sudden, unprovoked hostility toward her primary caretakers. He even included an affidavit from my sister, Margaret, stating that I had sounded confused and paranoid during a recent phone conversation. But the most damning and most foolish lie was buried on page 4, under the section requesting an emergency freeze on my assets. David claimed that I was attempting to sell my primary residence, 421 Elmwood Drive, due to a paranoid delusion that I was bankrupt. He explicitly stated to the court that 421 Elmwood Drive was my home, deliberately obscuring the fact that he and his wife were the ones currently living in it. He had intentionally committed perjury to manipulate a judge into freezing the sale of the house. I set the documents down on the table. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. The last remaining shred of maternal guilt I possessed evaporated into the cold, silent air of the dining room. He was not just trying to steal from me. He was trying to erase me entirely. He was willing to strip me of my human rights, lock me in a legal cage, and declare me legally dead while I was still breathing, all to avoid paying his own rent. I walked to the phone and dialed Richard Sterling's direct line. "Sterling," he answered briskly. "They served me, Richard," I said smoothly, 15 minutes ago. "I just received the courier from Dr. Thorne," Richard replied, the sharp edge of anticipation in his voice. "The medical affidavit is flawless, Eleanor. You are medically unassailable. Have you read the petition?" "I have. He committed perjury, Richard. He claimed Elmwood Drive is my primary residence to justify the emergency freeze. He did not disclose to the court that he is my tenant." I heard a sharp, brief laugh echo through the receiver. It was the sound of a lawyer realizing the opposing counsel had just handed him a loaded weapon. "He lied to the probate judge," Richard said, his voice dropping into a dark, satisfied hum. "That is a catastrophic error, Eleanor. If we bring this to the hearing, the judge won't just throw out the guardianship petition. He could refer your son for perjury charges." "Good." "The emergency hearing to freeze the assets is scheduled for next Tuesday," Richard continued. "We do not file our counter-evidence beforehand. We let him walk into that courtroom believing he has won. We let him stand before the judge and swear under oath that his petition is accurate." "And then?" I asked softly. "And then," Richard said, the smile evident in his tone, "we drop the anvil." I hung up the phone. I looked at the grandfather clock. It was 5 p.m. David was likely sitting in his living room right now, holding Chloe's hand, breathing a sigh of relief. They likely believed the arrival of the process server meant the war was over. They believed the house was safe. They believed I was currently sitting in my kitchen, weeping, broken, and terrified. I picked up my gardening shears, walked out the back door, and began trimming the dead branches off the oak tree. I had exactly 6 days to prepare for my son's funeral. The weekend before the court hearing felt like the agonizing, breathless calm inside the eye of a hurricane. I did not leave my house. I did not answer the landline. I spent my hours methodically packing the few sentimental items I kept in my study: Arthur's old fountain pens, photo albums from when David was young, and a small, delicate silver music box my mother had given me. I was not packing them to move. I was packing them to protect them. When the dust finally settled on Tuesday, I did not want the shock waves to shatter the only good memories I had left. On Sunday morning, a strange car pulled into my driveway. I stood behind the sheer curtain of the front window, watching as an unfamiliar dark blue sedan parked behind my car. A woman stepped out. It was Margaret. She had driven 6 hours from her home. She was wearing a thick, conservative wool coat, her face pulled into an expression of solemn, tragic duty. She looked exactly like a woman arriving to comfort the afflicted, entirely oblivious to the fact that she was the one holding a knife to my back. She walked up the steps and rang the doorbell. I did not answer. She rang it again. Then she knocked, calling out my name through the thick wood. "Eleanor, it's Margaret. Please open the door. I know you're in there." I turned away from the window, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. I stood by the marble island, listening to her muffled voice pleading through the front door. "Eleanor, please," she called out, her voice rising in pitch. "David called me. He's terrified. I just want to help you." Help me. The phrase was a poison pill wrapped in sugar. Margaret didn't want to help me. She wanted to observe my supposed decline so she could report back to the extended family with a fresh tragedy. She wanted to feel the moral superiority of the sane sister managing the broken one. I set my glass down. I walked back down the hallway, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the heavy door open. Margaret gasped, taking a half-step back. Her eyes frantically scanned my face, my clothing, my hair, searching for the signs of madness David had promised her. She expected a woman in a stained nightgown, muttering to herself, surrounded by the ruin of a neglected home. Instead, she found me wearing a perfectly pressed navy blouse and tailored slacks, my hair neatly pinned, my expression completely impassive. "Margaret," I said coolly, not stepping aside to let her in, "to what do I owe the pleasure of this unannounced visit?" "Eleanor," she breathed, her hand fluttering to her chest. She looked confused. I was not playing the part she had rehearsed for. I was so worried. David told me." "David told you I was erratic, paranoid, and financially incompetent," I finished for her, my voice devoid of emotion. "And you, without ever speaking to me, provided a sworn affidavit to his lawyer, supporting a petition to strip me of my legal rights." Margaret flinched as if I had slapped her. The blood rushed to her cheeks. I was trying to protect you," she stammered, stepping closer to the door, though I did not move an inch to grant her entry. "David said you were threatening to sell your own house. He said you cut off their phones." "Eleanor, that isn't normal behavior. You've always been so generous to that boy." Generosity, I said quietly, is a gift. Extortion is a crime. Margaret frowned, deeply bewildered. What are you talking about? Did David tell you, I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low, that he and Chloe have been living in my secondary property for 5 years without paying a single dime toward the principal? Did he tell you I purchased that home in cash to save him from bankruptcy? Margaret's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted back and forth. Did he tell you, I continued, stepping slightly out onto the porch, forcing her to step down to the first stair, that I only canceled his cell phone and his luxury auto insurance after Chloe attempted to manipulate me into signing a fraudulent power of attorney? No, Margaret whispered, shaking her head. No, he said you were confused. He said you forgot who they were. I know exactly who they are, Margaret, I said coldly. They are parasites, and I have finally stopped letting them feed. Margaret stared at me, the tragic sister facade crumbling entirely, replaced by the horrifying realization that she had been used. She had signed a legal document under penalty of perjury based entirely on the lies of a desperate man. Oh, my God, Margaret breathed, clutching the collar of her coat. Eleanor, I signed that paper. The lawyer told me it was just a formality to get you into a care facility. You signed a document helping my son attempt to steal my entire estate, I corrected her sharply. You helped him try to lock me in a legal cage. I didn't know, she cried, tears finally springing to her eyes, real tears this time, born of panic rather than performative grief. Eleanor, you have to believe me. I wouldn't have done it if I knew the truth. Ignorance is not an excuse for betrayal, Margaret. I looked at my sister. For 60 years, we had shared holidays, birthdays, and secrets. But the moment a younger voice told her I was broken, she had believed it without question. Eleanor, please, Margaret begged, reaching out to touch my arm. I stepped back, pulling out of her reach. Go home, Margaret, I said softly. But the hearing, she cried. It's on Tuesday. What is going to happen? On Tuesday, I said, looking her dead in the eyes, I am going to dismantle my son in open court. And if you are wise, you will call his lawyer this afternoon and retract your affidavit before the judge asks you to explain it under oath. I did not wait for her to reply. I stepped back inside, closed the heavy oak door, and slid the deadbolt locked. I stood in the hallway, listening to her muffled sobs through the wood for 3 full minutes before I finally heard her footsteps retreat down the stairs. The engine of her car started, and she drove away. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up my water glass. My hand was not shaking. My breathing was perfectly steady. The fear was entirely gone. I was ready. Tuesday morning dawned gray and bitter, the sky threatening a cold, sleeting rain that matched the atmosphere perfectly. I arrived at the county courthouse at 8:30 a.m., wearing a tailored black wool suit and a single strand of Arthur's pearls. Richard Sterling was already waiting for me by the security checkpoint, carrying an impossibly thick leather briefcase. "Good morning, Eleanor," Richard said quietly, his eyes sweeping over my demeanor. Finding no trace of anxiety, he gave a curt, satisfied nod. "Good morning, Richard." Margaret retracted her affidavit yesterday afternoon, he murmured as we walked toward the heavy wooden doors of Probate Court 3. David's attorney, a man named Harris, called me in a panic last night, asking if we were willing to negotiate a settlement before the hearing. "And you told him?" I asked, looking straight ahead. "I told him we do not negotiate with hostage takers," Richard replied smoothly. "Harris is walking into this courtroom blind. David has not told him about the financial ledger, the eviction, or the fraudulent lease. Harris genuinely believes he is representing a concerned son trying to save a senile mother." "Good. Let him believe it." We entered the courtroom. It was small, paneled in dark wood, and smelled faintly of floor wax and old paper. The judge had not yet arrived. David and Chloe were already seated at the petitioner's table. David looked awful. He was wearing a suit that suddenly seemed too large for him. His posture slumped, dark circles carved deeply under his eyes. Chloe sat rigidly beside him, wearing a conservative navy dress, her hands clasped tightly on the table. She looked pale. Her usual country club arrogance entirely evaporated, replaced by a brittle, terrified tension. When the heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind Richard and me, David's head snapped up. Our eyes met across the aisle. I did not glare. I did not look away. I simply looked at him with the cold, clinical detachment of a stranger observing a fascinating insect. David swallowed hard and quickly looked down at his hands. Chloe refused to look at me at all. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Miller, a stern-faced woman in her late 50s, took the bench. She arranged her robes, opened the file folder in front of her, and looked over the top of her reading glasses at the room. "We are here for the matter of the emergency guardianship petition for Eleanor Margaret Vance," Judge Miller said, her voice echoing sharply in the quiet room. "Mr. Harris, you represent the petitioner, David Vance?" "Yes, Your Honor," a young, overly eager attorney stood up beside David. "And Mr. Sterling?" The judge nodded toward Richard. "You are representing Mrs. Vance. Is your client prepared to proceed?" "We are entirely prepared, Your Honor," Richard said, remaining seated, exuding a terrifying, quiet confidence. "Mr. Harris, you filed an emergency motion to freeze Mrs. Vance's assets, specifically citing an impending paranoid sale of her primary residence, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Harris said, stepping out from behind his table. "My client's mother has recently exhibited severe, sudden cognitive decline. She has become erratic, financially destructive, and deeply paranoid. Without warning, she cut off vital support lines for her family and is now attempting to liquidate her primary residence, believing she is bankrupt. We are asking for an immediate freeze on all assets and temporary medical guardianship to prevent her from rendering herself homeless." Judge Miller looked at the paperwork, then looked at me. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, "your response?" Richard stood up slowly. He unclasped his leather briefcase. "Your Honor," Richard began, his voice calm, carrying effortlessly across the room, "my client is not exhibiting cognitive decline. She is exhibiting financial boundaries. The petitioner has grossly misrepresented the facts to this court in a fraudulent attempt to seize control of my client's estate." Harris scoffed loudly. "Your Honor, we submitted an affidavit from Mrs. Vance's own sister." "Which was formally retracted yesterday afternoon," Richard interrupted smoothly, handing a sheet of paper to the bailiff to pass to the judge. after the sister realized the petitioner had lied to her. David flinched violently at the petitioner's table. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut. Judge Miller read the retraction, her brow furrowed. "Mr. Harris, is this accurate?" Harris looked panicked. "Your Honor, I was informed of the retraction late yesterday, but my client's testimony remains—" "Your Honor," Richard cut in, stepping out from behind our table, holding a thick stack of manila folders. "The petitioner has sworn under oath that my client is attempting to sell her primary residence due to paranoia. I would like to submit Exhibit A into evidence." He handed the top folder to the bailiff. "Exhibit A is the deed to 421 Elmwood Drive, which the petitioner currently resides in, rent-free. I would also like to submit Exhibit B, a notarized lease agreement proving the petitioner is merely a tenant." Judge Miller's eyes widened slightly as she scanned the documents. "Wait," Judge Miller said, looking up at David. "Mr. Vance, you claimed in your petition that your mother was selling her home, rendering herself homeless. But these documents state she is attempting to sell a secondary rental property that you live in?" David's face drained of all color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Your Honor," Harris stammered, frantically whispering to David, "my client was referring to the family home." "Mr. Harris," Judge Miller snapped, her voice turning to ice, "did your client disclose to you that he was facing eviction from the property in question?" Harris froze. He looked at David. The betrayal on the young lawyer's face was almost comical. He had been played. "No, Your Honor," Harris whispered. "Your Honor," Richard continued, pressing the advantage with merciless precision, "the petitioner is not a concerned son. He is a desperate tenant attempting to use the probate court to halt a legal eviction. To further demonstrate his motive, I submit Exhibit C." Richard handed the bailiff the financial ledger I had created, along with bank statements dating back 5 years. This ledger details $140,000 of invisible financial support my client has provided the petitioner over the last 5 years. Cellular plans, auto insurance, country club dues, and free housing. 2 weeks ago, my client informed the petitioner she would no longer be funding his lifestyle. The courtroom was dead silent. The only sound was the rustle of paper as Judge Miller flipped through the bank statements. In retaliation, Richard's voice dropped to a low, dangerous rumble. The petitioner's wife attempted to coerce my client into signing a fraudulent power of attorney. When my client refused, the petitioner filed this guardianship petition to take her assets by force. "That's a lie!" Chloe suddenly shrieked, jumping up from her chair. The brittle tension had finally snapped. "She's crazy. She forgot her granddaughter's jacket. She stared at a window for 20 minutes. Tell them, Dave." "Order!" Judge Miller slammed her gavel down, her eyes flashing with pure fury. "Sit down, ma'am, or I will have the bailiff remove you." Chloe dropped back into her chair, sobbing hysterically into her hands. Judge Miller took a slow, deep breath. She looked at the terrified young lawyer, then at David, and finally she looked at me. "Mrs. Vance," Judge Miller said softly, "are you prepared to submit to a medical evaluation?" "I already have, Your Honor," I said clearly, remaining seated. Richard handed the final document to the bailiff. "Exhibit D, Your Honor, a comprehensive notarized cognitive assessment conducted 48 hours ago by Dr. Eris Thorne, Director of Neurology at the Sterling Clinic. It explicitly states, my client is in the 99th percentile for cognitive function and is in full possession of her mental faculties. Judge Miller read the neurologist's report. She read the conclusion. She closed the file folder with a sharp, resounding smack. Mr. Harris, Judge Miller said, leaning over the bench, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. You have exactly 5 seconds to withdraw this petition before I hold your client in contempt of court for perjury and refer this matter to the district attorney for criminal extortion. Harris didn't even look at David. The petitioner withdraws the motion, Your Honor, Harris said instantly, his voice shaking. Dismissed with prejudice, Judge Miller declared, slamming her gavel down. She pointed a finger directly at David. Mr. Vance, if I ever see your name on my docket again, you had better bring a toothbrush because you will be sleeping in a cell. Get out of my courtroom. David stood up. He looked completely destroyed. He was a hollowed-out shell of a man. His pride, his marriage, and his financial future entirely obliterated in less than 20 minutes. He didn't look at me. He just turned and practically ran out the double doors, Chloe trailing behind him, weeping loudly. Richard sat down beside me, slowly clicking his briefcase shut. Well, Richard murmured quietly, that was efficient. I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my suit. Thank you, Richard, I said softly. I walked out of the courtroom. The air in the hallway felt lighter. The suffocating weight I had carried for 5 years was finally gone. I had survived the hurricane. Now I just had to sweep away the debris. When I walked out of the heavy brass doors of the county courthouse, the cold autumn sleet had turned into a steady, freezing rain. I stood under the large concrete portico, buttoning my wool coat, watching the gray city traffic crawl past. A few yards away, David and Chloe were huddled under the minimal shelter of a bus stop awning. David's lawyer, Mr. Harris, was standing with them. He was animated, furious, jabbing his index finger in David's face. Even over the sound of the rain and traffic, I could hear fragments of the lawyer's screaming tirade. Lied to me! You committed perjury on my paperwork, Harris shouted, waving a damp manila folder. Do you have any idea what you almost did to my license? Do not ever contact my firm again. You are entirely on your own. Harris turned on his heel, opened a black umbrella, and marched away down the sidewalk, leaving them completely abandoned. Chloe buried her face in her hands. David stood paralyzed, the freezing rain blowing sideways against his thin suit jacket. He looked like a man who had finally realized the bridge he just burned was the only way off the island. He slowly turned his head. He saw me standing under the portico. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across the 20 yards of wet concrete. I did not feel a triumphant surge of vindication. I did not feel the cold thrill of revenge. I just felt a profound, heavy sadness. I was looking at a 32-year-old man who had possessed every advantage, every safety net, and every opportunity, and had chosen to throw it all away because he was too cowardly to live in the truth. David took a step toward me, stepping out from under the awning into the rain. "Dave, don't!" Chloe grabbed his arm, pulling him back. But David shook her off. He walked across the wet concrete, the rain instantly plastering his hair to his forehead. He stopped a few feet away from me, safely out of the rain, standing under the edge of the courthouse portico. He was shivering. "Mom," he whispered. His voice was broken, completely stripped of the arrogant armor he had worn for the last 5 years. "Mom, please." "There is nothing left to say, David," I replied quietly. "I'm sorry," he choked out, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "I'm so sorry. I didn't want to do this. Chloe, the house, the money, it all got so out of control. I didn't know how to stop it." "You stop it by telling the truth," I said, "but you chose to try to destroy me instead." "I was terrified," he sobbed, his knees buckling slightly. "If she knew the truth, she would take the kids and leave me. I couldn't lose my family, Mom." "So you decided to sacrifice your mother." David squeezed his eyes shut. He didn't have an answer. There was no answer. "You did not do this out of love for your family, David," I said, my voice gentle but perfectly lethal. "You did this to protect your own ego. You wanted to be the successful husband without doing the work. You wanted to be the provider without paying the bills. You built a fantasy, and when the bill came due, you tried to hand it to me." "I'll fix it," he begged, stepping closer. "I'll tell her everything. I'll get a second job. We'll move into a small apartment. Just, please don't cut me out completely. You're my mother." "I am your mother," I agreed softly. "And it is precisely because I am your mother that I must do this." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It was the card of a highly recommended bankruptcy attorney Richard had given me. I held it out to him. David looked at it, his hands shaking as he took it from my fingers. "You have 14 days left on your eviction notice," I said. "The house will be listed on the 1st of the month. Your phones will not be turned back on. Your insurance will not be paid. You are going to have to walk into that rain, tell your wife you are entirely broke, and face the consequences of your own actions." "Mom, please," he whispered, staring at the business card. "I don't know how to do this on my own." "Then you will learn," I said. "Goodbye, David." I turned away, opened my umbrella, and walked down the steps of the courthouse. "Mom!" David cried out behind me, a desperate, childish wail. "Mom, don't leave me!" I did not stop. I did not turn back. I walked to my car, got in, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking space, I looked in the rearview mirror. David was standing exactly where I had left him, staring at the business card in his hand, while Chloe screamed at him from the bus stop. I drove home. The house was perfectly quiet when I walked inside. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. The smell of cedar and old paper lingered faintly in the air. For the first time in 5 years, the house did not feel like a holding cell. It felt like a sanctuary. I took off my damp coat, walked into the kitchen, and put the kettle on the stove. The legal battle was over. The financial ties were severed. But there was still one invisible string left to cut, the social narrative. Chloe had threatened to tell the entire family I was an abusive, vindictive old woman. David had already planted the seeds of my insanity with Margaret. Even though Margaret had retracted her affidavit, the gossip would inevitably spread. In a few weeks, the extended family would gather for Thanksgiving, and the narrative of the poor, victimized Vance family being thrown out on the street by their cruel matriarch would be cemented into family lore. I was not going to allow it. I walked into my study, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop. I logged into my email and created a new draft. In the To field, I entered the email addresses of every single extended family member, close family friend, and associate David and Chloe possessed. Margaret, my cousins, David's college friends, the women from Chloe's neighborhood association, the Oak Ridge Country Club billing manager, everyone who had ever been a part of the illusion. Subject: a necessary clarification regarding the Vance family estate. I placed my fingers on the keyboard, and I began to type the truth. Dear family and friends, I am writing to you today to address a series of troubling rumors and falsehoods that have recently circulated regarding my mental health, my financial stability, and the living situation of my son David and his wife Chloe. It has come to my attention that David has informed several of you that I am suffering from severe cognitive decline, paranoia, and financial erraticism. He has claimed that I am randomly attempting to sell my home, rendering myself destitute, and abruptly cutting off financial support to his family in a fit of sudden, unprovoked cruelty. This narrative is entirely false. Because David has chosen to involve the extended family in an attempt to manipulate my autonomy, I find it necessary to provide the unvarnished truth. 5 years ago, David and Chloe were facing imminent bankruptcy. In order to protect his pride and prevent his wife from discovering his financial failures, I liquidated a portion of my late husband's life insurance and purchased the home at 421 Elmwood Drive entirely in cash, under my name. For the past 5 years, David and Chloe have lived there as my tenants, completely rent-free, under the guise of a fraudulent lease agreement David created to maintain the illusion of ownership. During this time, I have also silently absorbed the costs of their luxury auto insurance, their cellular plans, and the annual dues for the Oak Ridge Country Club, bringing my total invisible financial support to over $140,000. 3 weeks ago, after I politely declined to provide free weekend childcare due to physical exhaustion, Chloe attempted to coerce me into signing a durable power of attorney, claiming my need for rest was a symptom of dementia. When I refused and informed them I would no longer be subsidizing their lifestyle, David filed an emergency petition in probate court to strip me of my legal rights, commit perjury to freeze my assets, and place my entire estate under his control. Earlier today, a judge reviewed a comprehensive neurological assessment, proving I am in perfect mental health, reviewed the financial ledgers detailing David's absolute financial dependence, and dismissed the petition with prejudice, threatening David with criminal extortion and perjury charges. I am not senile. I am simply finished being extorted. The Elmwood property will be placed on the open market next week. David and Chloe have been legally served with an eviction notice and have 14 days to vacate the premises. I am providing this information not out of malice, but to definitively correct the record. I will not allow my sanity to be questioned by a man attempting to hide his own cowardice. I kindly request that you respect my privacy during this transition. I will not be answering further questions on this matter. Sincerely, Eleanor Vance. I read the email twice, It was utterly devastating. It was a scorched earth tactical strike on the very foundation of Chloe's social standing and David's remaining pride. It stripped away every lie, every pretense, and every carefully curated image they had spent half a decade building. It was the nuclear option. My finger hovered over the send button. I thought of Margaret, frantically calling the other aunts and uncles to spread the story of my supposed mental breakdown. I thought of Chloe sitting in the country club, sipping wine paid for by my late husband's labor, complaining to her friends about her difficult mother-in-law. I clicked send. The email vanished from the screen, rocketing through the digital ether to 34 different inboxes simultaneously. I closed the laptop. The silence in the study felt absolute. It took exactly 12 minutes for the fallout to begin. My cell phone, resting on the desk next to the laptop, vibrated violently. The screen lit up. Incoming call, Margaret. I let it ring. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Incoming call, Sarah Henderson, Chloe's best friend and the president of the neighborhood association. I let it ring. Over the next hour, my phone became a frantic, flashing beacon of panic. Texts flooded in, dense blocks of exclamation points and horrified questions. Voicemail stacked up, a chorus of stunned relatives and mortified acquaintances trying to process the absolute destruction of the Vance family myth. At 6:30 p.m., the landline rang. I knew who it was. The cell phones were still disconnected. The landline was the only way they could reach me. I picked up the receiver. "You ruined my life," Chloe shrieked. She wasn't crying this time. The sound that tore through the phone was a feral, unhinged scream of pure, cornered rage. The polite, syrupy daughter-in-law was entirely gone, replaced by a woman watching her social survival burn to the ground. "You sent that to everyone," she screamed, her breath hitching wildly. "You sent it to Sarah. You sent it to the Oak Ridge manager. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Sarah's husband just texted David and told him he's pulling his investment from David's firm. You destroyed us." "I simply told the truth, Chloe," I said, my voice as calm and flat as a frozen lake. "If the truth destroys you, it means you built your life on a lie." "I will kill you," she shrieked, the words tumbling out in a hysterical, venomous rush. "I will come over there and I will kill you, you evil bitch. You took my house. You humiliated me in front of my friends. You made me look like a parasite." "You are a parasite, Chloe," I stated softly, "and the host has finally died." "I'm taking the kids," she sobbed, the rage suddenly fracturing into a desperate, jagged despair. "I'm taking Mia and Leo, and I'm going to my mother's house in Connecticut. Dave is ruined. We have nothing. I'm leaving him, and you will never, ever see your grandchildren again." The threat hung in the air, heavy and sharp. It was the only weapon she had left. I closed my eyes. The image of Mia's small, warm hand holding mine flashed behind my eyelids. The phantom weight of Leo asleep on my chest ached in my ribs. I loved those children more than my own life. But I knew that if I broke now, if I allowed her to use them as a hostage to force my submission, She would use them for the rest of my life. I would spend my final years as a terrified prisoner, paying ransoms in cash and labor just to glimpse their faces. "If you leave David, Chloe," I said, my voice completely devoid of the panic she was desperate to hear, "that is a matter between you and your husband." "You don't care?" she choked out, genuinely stunned by my apathy. "You're just going to let me take them?" "I am not letting you do anything," I said quietly. "You are an adult making a choice. But understand this, Chloe. If you attempt to poison my grandchildren against me, they will eventually grow up. And when they do, I will ensure they read the court transcripts of the day you and their father tried to steal their grandmother's home." She gasped, a sharp, terrified intake of breath. "I am changing the locks on Elmwood Drive in exactly 14 days, I said. "Have your belongings out by then." I hung up the phone. I unplugged the landline from the wall jack. I picked up my cell phone, powered it down completely, and placed it in the top drawer of my desk. The silence rushed back in, instantly filling the room. It was done. The foundation was entirely removed. The house of cards had completely collapsed. I walked into the kitchen, turned off the overhead lights, and stood by the window, watching the freezing rain lash against the glass in the dark. I was completely, utterly alone. And for the first time in my entire life, I was finally safe. 14 days is an eternity when you are waiting for a ghost to leave your house. I did not turn my cell phone back on. I did not reconnect the landline. For 2 weeks, I existed entirely in an analog world. I drank black tea in the mornings. I read books I had ignored for decades. I watched the late autumn frost slowly kill the remaining life in my garden, turning the leaves brown and brittle. I did not know if Chloe had followed through on her threat to leave David. I did not know where my son was sleeping. For the first time in 32 years, I did not know how to reach my child, and he did not know how to reach me. The silence was absolute. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of the deep ocean. It crushed the breath out of me at times, but it also held me suspended, completely untouchable. On the morning of the first of the month, the sky was the color of bruised iron. I put on a heavy wool coat, drove across town, and parked on the street in front of 421 Elmwood Drive. Helen, my real estate agent, was already waiting in the driveway, alongside a man in a gray work jacket holding a metal toolbox. The 2 luxury SUVs were gone. The driveway was empty, save for a single overflowing plastic trash bin tipped over near the curb, its contents spilling onto the wet asphalt. "Good morning, Eleanor," Helen said quietly as I walked up the driveway. She did not offer small talk. The professional distance was a mercy. "This is Gary. He's going to handle the locks." I nodded to the locksmith. "Proceed." Gary stepped up to the heavy mahogany front door. He didn't bother using a master key or picking the lock. He simply attached a thick drill bit to his power tool and drove it straight through the brass cylinder. The loud, aggressive shriek of metal tearing through metal echoed down the quiet suburban street. It was a violent sound, completely at odds with the manicured lawns and polite facades of the neighborhood. It sounded exactly like the final brutal snapping of an umbilical cord. With a hollow clunk, the lock gave way. Gary pulled the handle, and the door swung open, groaning slightly on its hinges. "I'll wait out here," Helen said softly, stepping back from the porch. "Take all the time you need, Eleanor." I stepped over the threshold. The cold hit me instantly. It was freezing inside. They had turned the thermostat completely off before they left, a final petty act of spite, hoping the pipes would freeze and burst before I arrived. I stood in the entryway, the soles of my leather shoes resting on the hardwood. The house was empty, but it was not clean. It bore the distinct, ugly scars of a frantic, furious departure. There were deep black scuff marks on the pristine white baseboards where heavy furniture had been dragged without care. The walls were dotted with raw, jagged holes where picture frames and televisions had been violently yanked from the drywall. I walked slowly into the kitchen. This had been Chloe's sanctuary, the grand stage where she played the wealthy, successful matriarch for her neighborhood friends. Now the granite island was covered in a sticky film of spilled juice and dried coffee rings. The custom cabinets were left hanging open, their shelves stripped bare. In the center of the kitchen floor lay a shattered wine glass, the shards of crystal scattered across the expensive tile like ice. She hadn't even bothered to sweep it up. I walked down the hallway to the master bedroom. The massive walk-in closet told the final story of my son's marriage. The left side of the closet, Chloe's side, was entirely stripped. Not a single hanger, not a single shoebox remained. The right side, David's side, was a portrait of a man who had packed in a panic. Several of his cheaper dress shirts were left hanging, wrinkled and forgotten. A cardboard moving box sat crushed in the corner, labeled Dave's Office in black marker, half filled with loose papers and tangled phone chargers he had ultimately abandoned. She had left him. The reality of it settled over me like a heavy blanket. When the free house vanished, when the country club membership evaporated, when the illusion of limitless wealth was shattered, Chloe had packed her children and fled back to the Connecticut suburbs she came from. David's greatest fear had come true. He had lost his family. But he had not lost them because I refused to babysit. He had not lost them because I was a vindictive mother. He had lost them because you cannot build a permanent foundation on a lie. The moment gravity was applied, the entire structure had collapsed. I left the master bedroom and walked toward the back of the house. I stopped in front of the door to Mia's room. The wood was painted a soft, pale pink. I pushed the door open. The crib was gone. The rocking chair where I had spent countless hours rubbing her small back, fighting through the aching arthritis in my spine, was gone. The room was completely bare, save for a single object. Lying in the dead center of the beige carpet was a small, plastic, glow-in-the-dark star. It had fallen from the ceiling where David had glued a constellation of them 3 years ago. I walked into the room, knelt down, my knees popping loudly in the quiet space, and picked it up. The plastic was cheap, lightweight, and cold. A sharp, sudden ache flared in my throat. It was the first genuine emotion I had felt in weeks. Not anger, not betrayal, just the pure, devastating grief of a grandmother standing in the empty room of a child she loved, knowing she would likely never read her another bedtime story. I closed my fist around the plastic star, pressing the sharp points into my palm until it hurt. I had survived. I had kept my house. I had kept my sanity. I had kept my dignity. But survival is a lonely business. I stood up, slipping the star into the pocket of my coat. As I turned to leave the nursery, a faint, rhythmic sound caught my attention. It was coming from the small alcove at the end of the upstairs hallway, where David had set up a small home office desk. I walked toward the alcove. Sitting on the edge of the built-in desk was a black digital answering machine connected to the house's landline. In their frantic rush to strip the house, they had left it plugged into the wall outlet. A small, bright red light was blinking furiously in the dim hallway. Beep, beep, beep. It was the only sign of life in the entire frozen house. I stared at the red light. My heart began a slow, heavy, measured thud against my ribs. Someone had called the house after they left. Someone who did not know the house was empty. Or perhaps someone who knew exactly who would be walking through those doors on the 1st of the month. I stepped up to the desk. I reached out a trembling finger and I pressed the play button.